Please welcome Jordan Vogt-Roberts, Jenova Chen, Matt Nava, Robin Hunicke, and Austin Wintory.
Hi.
Hey.
My name is Jordan, and I'm obsessed with the game that they made a long time ago, almost 6 years ago at this point, and it started before that. I wanted to get these people together because they have not been in the same room together for probably more than 5 years. So I just want to start by having each of you introduce yourselves and what specifically you did on Journey, and then I'm going to talk about why I think Journey is so amazing, but if you could start.
I'm Jenova, and co-founder of the ThatGameCompany, and the director for Flow Flower and Journey. So mostly I kind of, start a project, but then have all these amazing people helping me to realize it. Yeah.
Sure. So I'm Matt Nava, and I was the art director on Journey, and also Flower. Since then, I was the creative director on a game called Abzu. And on Journey, we just did a lot of work to create the environments and characters and drawing and 3D modeling and all that stuff.
I'm Robin Hunicke. I was the executive producer, although originally when Jenova told me about the game, like 8 months before we started making it, it was that he wanted me to come on and be the lead designer. So I started off kind of interviewing his lead design and then went in and met everybody and was like, you don't need any more designers. You got great people on this team. They're all real smart. You just need a boss lady to help you get it done. So that's what I did.
Taskmaster.
That's right.
I'm Austin. I did the music. And one of the things that I'm kind of the odd one out because everyone was sort of under the umbrella of that game company except me. And so it seemed like everyone was kind of sharing roles a little bit, but I was like, nah, I'm just music. Like no design ideas or character ideas or mechanics.
That's not true. You came up with ideas.
I gave opinions.
Yeah, you had opinions. We talked to you through a lot about the game.
Yeah.
So.
But
The odd man out. Okay.
A little bit.
There's so many people that worked on the game, obviously. There's a bunch of people who could be up here, but to me, I wanted to keep it very small and intimate because you all represent sort of different pillars of the process, and you all sort of had teams underneath you, and I think that you can all obviously talk very specifically about those things. So obviously, there's a ton of credit due to a lot of people who are not here, but the first thing I want to ask you about is, what was the very first vision that you had for this? Because Journey, to me, it's a game, when people ask me about it, I always describe it as like the work of Shel Silverstein, where you could pick up the Giving Tree, and I think you could read that book every single day, and every day you would take something new from it. That's how sort of like simplistic and yet layered I think that game is. And to me, that's such a special thing. That's why I'm so obsessed with it. That's why I've sort of individually tracked all of you down. Robin's been hearing me nerd out about this thing for a very long time. But what was the first inkling that you had for this game? And then for each of you, what was the first thing that you heard about it? And what did that mean to you at the time? Like, I want to know what your vision was, but how did that translate in each of your minds originally?
So 2009 is the year when we launched Flower, and I was thinking about what to do next. And it happened to be the year where this game called Farmville is really revolutionized gaming industry, and that was also the year GDC where Zynga is on the stage accepting an award and telling everybody they should work for them or something like that. And it was a very controversial year. And so I played Farmville, and I said, so this is social game, it's a simulator game where your friends can visit your farm, but I felt it's like at TGC, what we're trying to do is to push the boundary of what games can be, and particularly how it makes people feel. And so everybody was saying at 2009, social game is going to be the future, and I was like, I don't feel social at all. And can I actually make a game that makes people really have a social, emotional experience? It's one thing to say, hey, how's it going, right? But it's when you have a deep emotional connection with someone, that to me is what social means. So we kind of start to set out for a project where we want to do a multiplayer game where people can emotionally connect to each other without necessarily just chat. I mean, on PlayStation, it's terrible to chat, because you can't type. There's no keyboard. And so in the process of trying to connect people, I looked into a lot of, psychology, general practices. Like usually people go through struggle together, form some kind of bond, right? I mean, that's how military trainings or corporal trust, exercise is doing, is to make people bond with each other. And so in the process, we want to create something very strong that connects people. And what could be more challenging and difficult than the process of living and dying, right? The most epic challenge is to live together and die together.
Lighthearted subject.
So we started this idea of having two people going through life together. And that's kind of like, I'm heavily borrowing things from Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey and The Power of Myth. And so I kind of start to approach, I think the first person I talked to was actually Austin. I was asking for, can you give me...
I want to make something like Farmville.
Yeah, I did my best and failed.
Exactly.
So something that could make I go through the entire journey of life with one music, right? And then the visual, and the design. So
That's right.
I will leave the rest to them.
So when he approaches you guys and says, I want to make something that's the story of life, are you like, cool, sign me up? Or like, what did that mean to each of you at that earliest phase?
Well, I just remember when Jenova was showing me his idea, he had a PowerPoint, and it was just like clip art.
Yeah.
Like little characters from like signs, like road signs and stuff. And I was just like, okay. How do you, and he asked me like, okay, we're going to make this game about an emotional connection. What does it look like?
Yeah.
And so I think this was like on my first interview, actually. Like before Journey even started, like I came in for an interview on Flower, and he was telling me about their next game, and that's really what I was excited about. I was like, oh, I can get through Flower so I can work on the next one. And I was like on the spot, it was like, well, maybe it's a desert because, if you have these two characters who are isolated, the only place they can go is to each other with no other kind of things in the environment to distract them. And so I think Jenova was like, okay. But that's where it started for me, was at that first interview.
But when he says something that lofty to you, story of life with two people, connection.
Jenova always says stuff like that. And that's how he talks.
That's how you decide lunch.
It's like, you're acting like it was unusual. Like he came to have lunch with me at EA and was like, hey, I want you to come and work for me on this game, and I want you to be lead designer, and here it is, and it's going to be about all these people, and they're going to go on this pilgrimage, and he'd actually put some concept art in it that he had done himself, and I was like, I had just gotten back from climbing a mountain in Bhutan, so I had just gone over a 16,500-foot peak on my own, and when I was going on that journey, I had decided to blow up my relationship and leave my job. Like, I realized on the way back down that I wasn't excited about coming back to LA, so I was already kind of checked out and ready to quit. And he just showed up and was like, I'm going to make this game about this human connection between strangers. It's going to be online. And I was like, hot damn, let's do it. Like, I'm ready to go. And like, I was interviewing actually on Destiny as well. So some friends of mine, Chris Butcher and my friend Alan Murray and stuff, were like, come up to Seattle and you can build this huge crafting system for this giant online game. And I was like, I could take a huge raise and go work on a giant, massive multiplayer game. Or I could go and take a pay cut and work in this little tiny studio. I mean, at the time, everyone at TGC was working in what is now a conference room in a building that was Sony Santa Monica. It was like a closet. There was like, I went there and I interviewed. I was like, well, nowhere to go but up, because there was only like 4 people, But it was awesome. It was a great idea, even when it was much larger than it ended up becoming. It was a fantastic idea. I thought his pitch was motivational, and Jenova's great at pitching. I mean, he got us the money, he got us the contract. By the time I showed up, we were ready to go. It was awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually, I also was finishing a hike in Bhutan, and no, in my case, Jenova and I worked together on Flow, and that was a similar kind of experience of cracking me out of my shell of what games can be. And so, but then did not work together on Flower, and we checked in periodically and would hang out at GDC, intermittently, but hadn't really seen much of each other in the 2 or 3 years between Flow and Flower, which had just then come out. So, like you said, the Flower had just launched. This was, I guess, early 2009, and it was like, hey, you want to get dinner and catch up, just hang out. Which was, in hindsight, so naive. That's not how this guy operates.
No, it's not at all.
Everything is much, And so I remember we sit down, and it's like, so let me tell you about the game. And then he proceeds pretty much exactly in line with what they said. It was this kind of data dump of really grand vision. I mean, like you said, it was lofty. It was one of those that, and I remember, I'll never forget this. At some point I said, I need to be taking notes. This is not a hangout, let's have a drink or whatever. And I was completely unprepared, so I ran up to the hostess station at the front of the restaurant, and I said, do you have anything I could write on? And they were like, no. I said, I got it. And if you hold down the eject button on the receipt printer, so the amazing thing is this long, very scarf-like sheet of sort of scroll came out, and I took all my initial notes, and I had them forever until one day someone broke into my car and took my laptop bag, and that notebook went with it.
I remember that.
But I had this long little thing with tiny notes where he basically said, it's the basic concept was there.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that, I remember saying that as a gamer, never mind as a composer, but as a gamer, I'm at this point in my life now where I realized I've been waiting for this game to exist.
Yeah.
And this is like where I need games in my life to be. I'm less interested in the games I was interested in 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that kind of thing, and as a kid, the kind of pure stimulus. I'm at a point in my life where as a gamer, I have no idea if what you're pitching is possible.
Right.
But God, I hope so, because I'm ready for that. And I remember just being so excited. And of course, the composer half of me was going, I'm so unqualified for this. Because it was like the story of life.
I've been fortunate enough to be able to spend some time with you recently, and they're right. The way you talk about things is very, very lofty. You're talking about the hero's journey. We're talking about a lot of very philosophical, ideological
Yeah, you probably
things.
don't want me at a dinner table.
No, to me it's fascinating. But when he's giving the three of you the pitch that he gave you, what was how did you visualize what this thing actually was? Was there any world where you were like, oh, it's this person and with this red scarf? But what was that initial idea of what in your mind's eye the very first version of this was?
Matt did a lot of really awesome drawings right away of ninjas and people with these flowing robes doing acrobatics and stuff in the desert.
It was going to be a ninja game,
Yeah.
totally.
Jukes. I remember there was one that was the guy juking. That was one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, I wanted to have jukes.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Actually, I want to bring out one thing. Before I hired Matt, I gave him a test, pretty much just what journey is going to be. I tell him this is what concept I want. And so I want a group of people, traveling in a mountain, going somewhere and struggling. The key is to show them helping each other and struggling. And Matt actually gave me a piece that is not a desert, but more like a tundra, mountain, frozen, it's all ice. But it captured the feeling, that's why, he's with us ever since Flower, because I know this is the guy to make Journey. And then there's the desert and,
There was that other one with the wall with the light coming through it. It was just basically a giant cliff with a slit in the middle and the light coming through and a little character kind of walking up to it. That was amazing. That was also really great. Just like a color sketch.
Before it was a mountain, you mean?
It was just a wall.
More like a canyon.
Yeah, it was like a canyon wall, and the person was really tiny.
Yeah, I had this idea, which was okay, we have these characters in there in the desert, but where do they go? What do they do? You know, we need to have an emotional connection. How does that happen? And so I thought originally that there would be bad guys that they're hiding from, and they would be dragons. So Journey, actually, remember Dragon? We had a prototype, early prototype called Dragon, which was 2D.
Trilobites.
Yeah,
Trilobites,
and they were based on trilobites that would fly. And I was like, okay, well, you have to get past them, but how do we signal where your goal is? And I thought, oh, it will be this series of canyons, and each canyon is connected by a narrow slit, like a slot canyon, essentially. And so I drew this concept that Robin was talking about with that slot canyon, and eventually we realized we can only do one instead of multiple, and then we were putting it further and further out in the distance, and you couldn't see it over the dunes and the architecture that we were prototyping in 3D. So I started to make it, instead of a wall, it was getting taller, and then eventually it was the mountain.
Became the mountain.
The mountain image.
It still has a little slit at the top, though.
Yeah.
So.
I think making anything creative is often sort of like being on this ship in the middle of a storm, and you have to figure out how to navigate the waves, but you generally know what direction you're headed. There's sort of a true north. So we still have to go this way, but right now, in the midst of these waves, we need to weave in and out and adjust. For each of you, in your individual sort of departments and what you were sort of shepherding, what was each of your true north in this process? As things got crazy, as deadlines come and go, for each of you, what was that thing where you said, I'm trying to make this? Like, obviously that's a very lofty idea, but there had to be something more tangible that each of you had to be holding on to in a specific way.
I think that connection between the people, I mean, everyone on the project, you know, I was managing the project at the highest level, so everyone would come to me and complain about things they didn't like, or they would ask for resources, or they'd say, we should really focus on this or that, and so a lot of it was just like, you know, me organizing different requests from different people at different times,
Herding cats.
Herding cats, essentially, yeah, and that's what producers do. And at one point, we got pretty bummed out because the game was really boring. Like when we would be testing it, and the cutscenes would come on, people would like look at their phones or just look at this camera that was filming them and be like, "What the fuck is this?" Yeah. It was really embarrassing, and we were really sad. And I actually I asked someone to come.
Someone fell asleep in the playtest.
Yeah, so it was rough. And I asked someone to come in and play it, and they came and played it, and they told the team that it was romantic and it was beautiful, and we should keep going. And at that moment, I realized, yeah, we just need to make the romance between the players the focus. And I started thinking about like misconnections. Like, wouldn't it be so cool if people played Journey together and they had like a misconnection and they felt like touched by the other player in some way? And that romance word really stuck in my brain. And it was Michael John, who now teaches with me at UC Santa Cruz. And romance, I wrote romance on a sticky and I put it on my computer monitor, and I looked at it every day because it was like, it was really lovely to be with someone when it was lovely, but when it was boring as hell.
So for you, his original sort of vision was able to translate to you of just connection.
The connection.
Okay, and then what about on the art level?
Well, it was a challenge because, like I said, the initial pitch was so broad and kind of, lofty, as you described it. It's like, well, my job was to, how do you make that into something really tangible? And that idea of like communicating this universal story that we wanted to do. We wanted to make this thing that felt like you already knew about it.
Yeah.
And how do you do that with your visuals? And I had to figure out through the process of making the game that meant simplifying things, making things iconic, and making things not representational of like reality, but representational of the way that people interpret reality. So the art direction was trying to take this space of the desert, make it flat, make the character, instead of this very complex thing, we had a version of the character that had like 100 arms on it. And we realized after some prototypes that people just wanted to punch each other when they had arms on it. Yeah. So I was like, well, what if we take them all off? What if we, just take parts away? Like he actually had feet. We took those off.
Yep.
was mostly for animation.
The character doesn't have arms because people's first inclination was to punch each other.
Well, actually, or climb.
They
And
wanted to.
we couldn't afford to
They
implement
wanted
climbing. We had
climbing.
2 engineers, man. It was
It's
like, no way.
yeah. Journey was most of the time was 7. Then eventually when launched was 12 people. So any feature you can imagine, we are out of people to do them. So I think a lot of the resource constraints also helped the creative process.
It was so constrained. It was crazy.
But I remember that being a big part of the architectural art direction as well. Like it was like arches or something were impossible to render.
Yeah, I
like
wanted
that.
to do
just
like.
couldn't get anything. And actually, Matt made a bunch of art for the game early on that was like the Parthenon and like some stuff like this. And we put it in the desert, and we had this little like kind of triangle kite character that was running around, and we had 4 colors because we had 4 players. And I mean, there was a significant period of time where the game was not just 2 people. It was like, we really want to do multiplayer, we really want to do all these things. And we tried a lot of stuff, and a lot of the art that we did early on ended up just getting completely cut. And then he did a second look, and that look was really painterly, but like it was very hard to implement. It was going to take too much time to get it done. And then the last year or so, he collaborated really closely with John Edwards, the lead engineer, on a hybrid solution that was partially digital and partially Matt's amazing, just like raw drawing skills. And we started hiring people in to make the art itself because he couldn't do all the models. But for the longest time, he was in the game, making the game, like the levels right there. And like I would say that was one of the things that you really picked up on the project was you like learned how to make a game level.
Yeah, I
and,
became
like,
a level designer.
Yeah, you became a level designer over the course of the project. Yeah, exactly. It was good.
It was such a crazy time because in the beginning, we just come off of Flower, and we had a custom engine that was built to make that game, and we needed to start the production of Journey right away. We didn't have time to invent a new tool, so we had to use this level design tool that was designed for these linear levels. And we actually wanted to make a very open game before we had the concept of the mountain as this linear goal ahead of you. We wanted to make, we've been talking about making procedural desert levels that go all different ways. And so
lofty dreams.
Yeah.
I was so into that
without
procedural level
Unity
design.
or Unreal, we have a very limited set. Like even in Flower, we don't even have animation. You can't make a model.
I remember asking John, I was like, so we're going to have a character, he needs to be able to animate, and they're like, I don't know about that. Like, I don't know.
That sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah. So they implemented an animation system for the game, and yeah, it was a very difficult thing to do.
Remember when the character was going to animate based on how high they were in the air? Remember that idea?
Yeah.
And we had so many dumb ideas.
But the very
amazing
first
the game
prototype
shipped.
was just Flower with the grass turned off.
Yeah. So now
And
that thinking back on the 6 years, being away from the project, and it does seem like having very high ambitious goal and almost nothing in terms of resource is actually probably why Journey is quite different. If we actually have all these advanced technologies, we might actually not be this creative.
Yeah, we had to work really hard with limited resources.
Well,
that's true.
Sure. In filmmaking, though, for me, as soon as you have all of the resources on the planet, generally your work starts sucking. Like it's when you don't have resources, when you don't have the money, when you can't get those sets, that you force yourself to be intuitive and you have to think outside the box. So what were moments like that for each of you where, like, as much as it seemed like a bad idea or that you were settling at the time, in retrospect, those limitations actually sort of added to the iconic sort of beauty of that game? What are those things for each of you?
Well, I can speak to one of those for sure because the music budget shrank like like 80% over the course of because when I remember sitting down having a budget conversation before the game, it was probably only a few days after this restaurant scroll incident where Kelly, the other producer, Kelly Santiago, said, can we have a conversation about how much things would cost, the scope of it, and so we went through what was the understanding then about the kind of scope of the game and then how much music that would end up yielding. And we came up with this super awesome, we're going to record it all at Fox. And
it's going to be huge.
It's going to be, and we're going to have a big orchestra. And I even did that, like that initial piece that Jenova was talking about. I wrote like a 10-minute piece that's kind of this overture of the whole game in one piece.
Yeah.
And I always had this idea of starting really lonesome with this cello, but by the end it becomes this like Wagnerian opera. And And in hindsight, yeah, if they had kept that budget and we had actually produced that, I think it would have been a much lesser score. Because every time I would check in, and because the schedule extended several times. So
yeah,
we
spent the money. Let's just be
Yeah.
real. It's not like the money disappeared. It was like
It wasn't a
we spent the money on
mysterious
services and
yeah.
help. We basically burned through the budget 3 times.
Well, and the other thing, though, was that the game was really close to its finish, like its cut-off work period, you know, where the ship date was looming several times. So it wasn't that it was a 3-year project and we were planning on 3 years. It was like a one-year project or whatever that
doubled,
that kept incrementally doubling as you went. So the finish line was like a few months away for a while.
Yeah.
Like and then that goalpost just kept shifting.
Where the finish line is just an axe that's going to come down. You're not going to get any more money. That was, I mean, it was like, you need to finish this game.
Exactly. But so as a result, you have to plan when you're writing a score. You have to plan. When you're writing, you don't want to be writing stuff that you then can't record. And so, but my knowledge of what I could record was a shifting target.
Yeah.
And so I had to get kind of nimble. And then at some point, the idea became, well, what if the player is the cello, basically? And that tracks through the whole thing. And we very gradually add a little bit so that I could get in with an orchestra for just one day. And 90% of that music's actually just the very end of the game.
Yeah.
And then but people walk away with the impression that it's this orchestral score throughout. And it's not even close to that.
And we also did a bunch of work at that, like around the 1.5-year mark when we did get the first extension. We also started talking about the second player having an influence on the score and the score becoming dynamic. And
yeah, that was actually one of my bad ideas.
That did creep the scope terribly and did make our lives harder.
No, but I also pitched,
it was totally worth it.
Because of the importance of the multiplayer dynamic, I said, what if the only time you can possibly even hear an orchestra is if you're connected with another player and you're like singing to each other and the system is basically showing that there's a lot of love going on. Yeah. And so Sony was... And probably you also said, so basically the most expensive thing should be optional for the player, because technically you can play the game offline. Yeah. And so like we could blow our whole score in something that's kind of like an Easter egg. And I said, yeah, wouldn't that be amazing? And no, not so much. And they were the adults in the room who stopped me from myself.
I was going to say that one of the things for me that felt so important was when we decided at the very, very, very end to change the style of the cutscene graphics. Like you had like a weekend, I think, where you came in.
One weekend.
Tell that story. That's a really great one. that was intense.
Yeah, we had this idea that, we had that, like, it goes all the way back to the tech. Like we had this tech for Flower where it was like there's segmented levels and just load at the end. And we didn't plan that into the initial game. And so you got to this point, you're like, well, there's just a weird fade to black for no reason. Like, why? We need to have something that segments the experience. So we're like, okay, we'll have a cutscene. And at first we thought like, oh, we'll just have these kind of glyph images that will show up. And I had this idea for them being, carved stone. And
stills.
And then John Edwards was like, no, we don't have enough texture memory for that, so you'll have to make them like pixel art.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so I figured that out. And then we tested them forever. I had this collection of images that we were like, what does this mean? Like all these people would be like, I have no idea.
That makes no sense to me.
And I was like, oh my God, how do you make this image communicate clearly? And there was one weekend when I came in and I had this idea for a cutscene that's halfway through the game where you see your own journey in this kind of circular camera cut.
Awesome.
And once I did that one, once I had that concept, I was like, okay, now I can figure this out. And I had to put animation in, and I came in one weekend before a playtest and animated all of them.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that was like one of the only times when I really crunched on the game.
So that moment, which to me is like one of the most potent moments in the game.
It's such a good moment, yeah.
It's such an incredible moment where I think it begins to hit you, the journey that you've gone on and how it all sort of connects together. That was a late-breaking idea.
Oh yeah, that was.
It was like literally the last.
Just one cutscene. He animated all the cutscenes.
All of them, like literally all of them.
Every single cutscene from the entire.
So that we could test them, and we tested them, and people instantly got it. Like they went from being like, "What is this?" to watching, like, and being really captivated because what we were doing was we were scrolling along these images. So it was a lot more like a comic book. It was a lot more like telling a story. Where when we had the fades, it was just people just couldn't connect what they were doing in the game to that motion. I think that the movement
people saying,
really helped, yeah.
They were saying at that point, I would ask them, what does it mean now? And they would say, I have no idea, but it probably means like it's my own journey or something.
Yeah. And you're like, yes!
Well, that's exactly what it means.
It's
yeah,
exactly
like,
what it means. And then people would play and they'd get emotional and be like, it's just like my life, man, and like cry. And that was when we knew we were really going to hit it. But it was late. It was like,
yeah.
Well,
I
the
mean,
funny thing was
dicey.
the music, it existed way before that.
the very first piece of music that you made was the shipping theme.
yeah.
That was crazy.
No, but even that scene, the big circular
big
kind
circular
of
scene,
summary
yeah.
moment,
That scene, yeah.
I wrote a cue to the earlier versions that you're talking about, and I remember Jenova saying like, "Don't change." It's actually one of the kind of
don't change
nicest
anything.
things that I ever got on the project was you said we have to figure out how to make this scene live up to this music as opposed to the other because I kept saying I'll rewrite it because this is. I said I'm overselling it. There's like
Yeah.
very static, simple images, and the music is like, "Feel me," and it's like I said. I think I'm in a different game right now from what you did, and it
We
was
just
like
needed
let
that.
us iterate on the scene.
The Michael Bay circle shot. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Michael Bay circle
exactly.
shot. Jenova,
Yeah.
what was the moment for you that you felt like something really came together?
I think there are two scenes that I cried myself. The scene of the snow mountain climbing,
Yeah.
and then the scene where you fly up through a waterfall and you hit a jellyfish. The second scene was powerful because of the music. So Austin and I, we keep saying, we made the final level, and then Austin got very excited about final level. He would make a music, and then the music is so emotional. I'm like, this level sucks
Yeah,
compared
we
to
had
his,
to change
to his
it.
music.
Well, the first version of the final level was on
Yeah.
rails.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was
Yeah,
like,
it was
Yeah,
pretty
it was
bad.
Star Fox.
Yeah,
You
no,
literally were flying
it
through these
wasn't even
rings,
Star
and you
Fox,
could
it was
you could like.
Knights.
It was the very last thing we
used
made.
Knights as an
Right.
example. Yeah,
And
it
then
was
we
rough.
make the game better. We thought, okay, finally we caught up to Austin. And then Austin felt like his music is worse.
Yeah.
And then he would rewrite the music. I think the final level's music happened 3 times or
Yeah.
something, or 4 times.
Yeah,
and
we
then
agreed a lot.
eventually, when I'm playing it, I was touched every time when that moment of the gameplay and the music happened to be both on the climax.
Yeah.
The death sequence is also interesting because Journey is the process. The emotional arc of Journey is very much reminded me of the project
Yeah.
emotional arc. Recently, I was giving a talk, and I find this thing on the internet called "What It Takes to Make Something Great." And there's this curve. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but it's basically the 3-act structure of any Hollywood story. Like at the beginning, it's all happy, and you thought you're gonna make this great idea come true, and then you start to realize, oh, you know what? This is gonna take a while.
Yeah.
And then you were like, I'm not sure if I know what I'm doing.
Where are we?
And then it's like, where are we? This is gonna take forever. And then you're like, oh shit. Right? And then even when you go through the pit, when you come out of it, you don't know if this is gonna be something great.
Yeah.
And I think so. Journey was originally a 1.5-year project, and a year in, we know clearly this is something that needs a lot more attention and care.
Yeah.
And so we were, talking to Sony to say, hey, can we extend this to a, 3-year project? No, we don't have money.
Yeah, technically we asked for 2 years and then we
Right,
asked for another
right, yeah.
year.
Yeah, we don't have money, and then we got 2 years, and at the end of the second year, we have the whole game together, but it's still clearly not emotional. If you imagine you would be drawing an emotional arc,
Yeah.
the peak is not high enough and the bottom is not low enough, and ultimately, if you want to touch anyone, the emotion has to surge. Right, so it's strong enough that you would feel something that punch you, and so we know the game did not hit the emotional intensity, and so we asked Sony to give us more money, and they just got hacked for the PlayStation Network, and Sony wasn't winning for console, so they said we can only give you one more time, right? But
Yeah,
then
we
not
had
anymore.
friends there. They were nice to us.
Right. And so, at the end of the project, when we were doing the mountain level, we are running out of money. Everybody's taking pay cut ever since the 3rd year. Like, we are already on a shoestring budget. Everybody's getting low salary, and then we all took half pay. because we really want to finish the game, and we know, we have so much love in it.
Yeah, we had just a whole conversation with the team, like, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to get this done?
Yeah, and so there's a lot of struggle. I mean, imagine companies running out of money, and you are running out of time to deliver the game. A lot of people start to get really amped up, including myself. And our company is very young, so a lot of people are not particularly mature. Right? I would say including myself. So there's a lot of stress at work. At the
no
time,
one had worked anywhere else except TGC, but me.
Yeah, the TGC started with 4 founders, and none of us worked anywhere. we just directly come out of school, formed a studio. At the time, I also had 3 months where I'm on a waiting list to see a specialist because I suspect I have brain cancer. So when I was working on this death sequence, it's just kind of like, I was also working, on Saturday, 2 a.m., alone in the studio. I'm like, why am I going through such struggle? And just playing the game and seeing the character falling, it reminds me of my own life at the moment. I was just really kind of tuned into that moment, so I was trying to see how long exactly it takes for me to fall. Right? I want to feel like I'm really, really at the end. So every time I see myself falling in the field, if it's too early, it just feels it's not real. If it's too late, then I feel maybe people can't really be patient to see that. Yeah. But when it's just right, I feel the tear in my eyes, just, the same feeling of struggling and dying.
That's actually my moment for seeing everything come together is really at that same point in the story of the game and the story of the team, because Jenova did stay a couple weekends working on that, and then there was a huge conversation about, okay, what is the end of the game?
Well, that's when I got hit by a car.
Yeah, and Matt got hit by a car. There was a bunch of bad stuff going on. We had like a lot of bad mojo in the studio, and everybody was just so turned up because we knew that effectively what was going to happen was we were going to finish the game and then we were going to lay everybody off, which is effectively what happened. Like, we closed the studio the same day that we had the ship party.
You haven't really talked about that.
Yeah, we never really talked about it publicly, but effectively we ran the company into the ground in order to make the game that we wanted to make, as opposed to doing the other thing, which would be sign a deal for something that we didn't want to make and put Jenova in a situation where we had to make a game we didn't want to make, or like crunch really hard and have everybody like just be terrible. What we decided to do was we would work regular hours and try to get it done, paying everybody except the founders and the people that own the company, so the people that had a stake in the company didn't take pay. And we made this decision as a group. Like, we all sat down and made it together. And when I was having that conversation with everybody, I was like, we have to do the right thing for the game and for us. And that means that this is going to be a tough process, but we can get through it. And the ending of the game became this huge point of like reflection for us, where we sat down at one point. We all grabbed lunch and we went over to the park and we sat down and we talked about like, okay, what is the point? Do you die? Do you come back? Like, are you alive at the end? Are you dead?
What's
like, what does it
crazy is
mean?
that this project didn't have those answers from the beginning. Like,
no.
There was no script. There was no plan. We made the game in linear order from beginning to end.
And we made it 3 times,
and
really.
the ending came like that conversation was at the end of the project when everybody was
freaking
at their
out.
wits' end, not being paid. I got hit by a car, and then I was out for a while, and I had to like borrow my grandma's walker for a week. And I came back in with a cane, and I was like, okay, I'm going to make the end of this game.
Yeah.
And you walked for like 2 minutes before collapsing.
No, it was really intense.
There was a staircase up to the studio, and I took like, a really long time to get up there, and I was like, hey, I'm back.
We really sat down and we said, what does this mean to us?
Crazy.
And we had a hard time agreeing. We ended up actually having one playtest where there were 2 endings in the playtest, and we accidentally A/B tested the ending of the game. And the ending that people liked more, and the one that the studio ended up feeling was kind of right, was where it was really ambiguous. and you had to sort of make the story up yourself. Like, we decided to let go of control in that moment. And for me, that was like it was a huge accomplishment for the team because everyone was so young, because most of the people on the team hadn't shipped a game. And I had seen teams go through this, and to watch everybody come together in those last moments and like feel like a team and make the ending something that we could let go of, just like we were letting go of the studio effectively. Like, that incarnation of TGC's never existed again. And like, we let it go. And letting it go was the best thing that we did. Like, it really made the game, in my opinion, it made the game classic. If we had tried to hit you over the head with a point, you would have left the game going, well, like, that was really beautiful, but I didn't like the ending. This way, you can't do that. It's what you want it to be. You know?
There was also the one really I remember I had lived in New York before coming out here, going to college, and my old college roommate was visiting. And he said, what are you working on these days? And I said, I'm working on this really, like, this game I think is going to be something special, and let me see if they can have you play test it. So I remember he went in and he used your computer. You stepped out of your office. And this was pretty late in the process, because this was that same period of, like, the ending is eluding us.
Yeah.
And I remember from my perspective, you guys probably see it a little differently, but from my perspective, it looked like everybody knew that the ending in general wasn't quite working, but where exactly the problem wasn't clear yet. And what happened was my roommate, normally these play tests were, kind of like a focus test. It's an organized event. They pull people in who are kind of supposedly objective. This was nothing like that. This was just an unofficial, come check out my thing and tell me your thoughts. And so his name's Will. He sat down in this thing, and then he got right up to the end. Player collapses, spoilers. And the camera goes, this flash to white, and then the game crashed and hung there. And he had no idea. And he sat there for like 10 minutes having this transcendent experience. Yeah.
And he's like, it's the best game I've ever played in my life.
Yeah, he came out of Robin's
Robin's it's amazing.
room. He had this look, and he was like...
And meanwhile, the game had crashed.
Yeah, and we all realized, like, oh, shit, you actually didn't experience the end of the game. So then it was like, reboot it, reload the summit level, fly around in the clouds, and he was like, oh, yeah, that's lame, cut that. And that's, I think, from my perspective, that was the moment of realizing it really works until that moment. And we have something, and it loses the thread as soon as you go forward from there.
And we really had no time to do the last level of the game. Like, Nick and Matt put it together in like a day or something.
It was a weekend.
It was like so.
Another weekend.
It was another weekend.
John Edwards and I were there, and
It was tough, man. Like we were really trying to make something good, and we were really tired. We were tired. We were like at the end of the journey. We were exhausted. We were trying to get over the mountain.
But it was also the same, like, that loftiness. It was like, how do you even end this?
Yeah.
And because there was actually another weird thing that happened. I remember I kept rewriting the very last moment over and over. It was one of the few moments that Jenova would just go, no, do it again, do it again, do it again. It's like, most of the music is the normal amount of revisions, a few times, then you get it. But then the ending, the very, very ending, like literally the last few seconds, there's like 1,000 versions.
Yeah.
And because Jenova kept saying, I don't feel it, make it bigger, make it bigger. And the music just kept, and then in the grander scope, the music is kind of going along, and then there's this super steep arc where it just gets way too big. And it still wasn't working. It wasn't authentic. It wasn't, and I couldn't figure it out. I didn't know what it was. And then this really lucky thing happened where I was asked, there was an orchestra in LA that was doing a concert of video game music, and I had played music with them before, and they said, do you want to put anything on the show? And I said, I'm working on a game, and it could be really cool to take music and then do versions of it as like a preview of this. Of course, at the time, Journey was supposed to only be a few months away, but it was...
Yeah, we thought it was the end, and we were going to take the team out to the event, and we went to the event.
Yeah, it was supposed to be like, a little bit more summary.
Yeah.
So I wrote like a cello concerto that was like inspired by Journey, but not verbatim, literally Journey. And the main thing that was missing in the actual score was the ending. And so I was free to write whatever I wanted for this piece. And so I said, instead, I didn't think about it. I just instinctively was like, oh, it could be nice. I have this amazing cellist, Tina Guo, on stage with me. And I led the idea of it starts with her alone, should end with her alone. And so it narrowed down to just the cello. And all of TGC was in the audience. And the next day, Jenova calls me and was like, you solved the ending.
Yeah.
He was like, we've been going the opposite direction. We keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and that was wrong. And I don't know how else we would have come to that conclusion.
The visuals also had that same problem.
That's true. Yeah, we
where
kept
like
getting.
we had these very like kind of specific endings where the journeyers meet their ancestors. Or,
Yeah,
like, it
there's
was
a
very
big party at the end.
a big party. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
not
big
good.
party.
And
Oh,
like
man.
it took like this kind of stroke of thinking about it from a different angle to come up with the image that we went with. It was just kind of like, okay, take everything away, like end in a very similar way to where you began.
Yeah, in the way that a snake eats its own tail, and that
Right.
everything happens over and over. That every project is a disaster. That everything that you
Sure.
dream of doing just ends up being way bigger than you expected.
But I would argue, we got to wrap it up, but I would argue that all of those roadblocks that you hit, all the tumult you went through, all the pain you went through, that is what, as you said, makes it classic. So let me ask you this question as we wrap it up. As now you've put it out there that as you're releasing this game, you're all in the thick of this. And it's this heartbreaking thing that everyone's going to have to get laid off, and
Yep.
and you've all come together to make this thing. So talk to me, to wrap this up, about that moment. Do you know you're releasing something that special? Do you know what it's going to mean to people when it's going out there? Talk to me about that low, and then the moment for each of you that it made it all worthwhile, where you said, you know what, I'm glad we went through that gauntlet. I'm glad we went through hell, because look at what this means to other
Shipping
people.
it made it worthwhile for me. Honestly, seeing everybody pull it together at the end, like, that's every producer's dream, is that the team will like cohere and that something will get done. Like, I definitely had nights in the last 6 months of the game where I didn't know if we were going to make it, and I would not be able to sleep, and I would stay up thinking like, how can I get this thing over the edge? And like actually submitting it and having it cert, like, that was the victory for me. Everything else after that was gravy. All the awards, all the accolades, people telling us that they love the game. It still happens, right? We all get mobbed everywhere we go by people saying that they love Journey. The victory for me was that we made it.
It was the fan art. Seeing people be able to draw the character that I designed
yeah.
and being inspired by the game to create things. That
Yeah,
was
dude,
really,
I have one here
that was
from
it.
Brazil.
yeah, right on. So that was it.
Man.
Yeah, to me, it's more like when we finished the game, we did a 25 people playtest. I think 3 of them had tears.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not like they play at home. They're playing with surveillance camera and things. So I feel, okay, if we can get 3 out of 25 people feel emotional, that's job done. But I didn't know the game is going to be that much influential. Like, to me, it's just, I feel this is what we set out to do.
Yeah.
And we've accomplished that, and the rest of it is just, I hope people like it, because like every time we have playtesters, they would be like, this game does not have any guns in it or action, it's kind of boring. Can you add combat, like stuff like that. But yeah, I was certainly surprised at how well received the game is at the end, and sometimes I do wonder, we start to get in these emails from fans, right? And people are telling us, I think there's over 20 people who told us how playing this game was helping them to recoup from their grief. For people who lost their family members, fathers, it's just like we didn't intend to make this game a kind of a like a psychotherapy almost for these people. But looking back, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact we are using the classic Joseph Campbell structures. We are talking about something very abstract but very relatable about life. And many people was able to project their own life into the game and get something out of it. I think when we ship it, I had no idea how this game can do that.
Well, I think you guys all made something truly classic. I think for me, it's a game changer for what games can be, what art can be in games, what it can make you feel. And so you truly all have created a classic in my mind. So thank you guys for coming here and talking about it with me. I will continue nerding out about this game for the rest of my life. But thank you guys. Please give it up for the Journey team.
Thank you.